All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Thea Sebastian. I am the founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. called the Futures Institute. And I just want to start off by sharing a little bit of how I came to this work. Then I'm going to chat a little bit about my organization and the broader community safety portfolio that it works on. And then what we're really here to talk about today, which are alternative responses for domestic violence. And I'll end with just a little bit of a call to action based on the fairly complicated political landscape and funding landscape that I know everybody is navigating today. So just to get started, as a quick introduction, I am actually a former teacher, started off focused in on issues around education, around all things related to youth, found myself in law school, and then moved into doing work that related to criminal justice. And I would say that that was where the seeds of my passion for the issue that we're chatting about here today really started, which is to say that I was doing a lot of work on issues around pretrial detention, around fees and fines, around the criminalization of poverty. And I found that in many cases, it felt that there were tensions sometimes between being somebody who is passionate about gender justice, about responses to domestic violence, but then also about making sure that we are not increasing mass incarceration in this country and having too many people behind bars oftentimes because they simply can't pay a sum of money. And so I became really interested in figuring out what are the solutions for this? How can we really keep harm survivors safe in a way that also is creating more justice in terms of issues around policing and incarceration in this country? So that was in about 2018, 2019. And I would say that that general mindset is what drove me ultimately to start the Futures Institute, which is to say that I started to dive into what the evidence says really keeps communities safe by stopping violence and harm before it happens, and by centering responses to violent incidents that really break the cycle of violence for the long run. Over time, that became a bigger and bigger piece of my work. And so about a year and a half ago, I founded the Futures Institute. So briefly, what we do at the Futures Institute, we do policy research and we do policy advocacy to create safe, thriving, connected communities. On the policy research side, we put out reports, evidence guides, briefs, which are really designed to create evidence-based policy recommendations for lawmakers at all levels of government to actually stop the cycle of violence before it happens and to really strengthen underlying community-based institutions. So we put out a report on how built design in communities, so things like parks and streetlights and remediating vacant lots, how that can bring down rates of violence, in particular gun violence. We have a report that came out just a few weeks ago, which is a guide for state governors on how they can create community safety across their entire administrations. We have another guide that'll be coming out soon on how to create a community safety ecosystem at the local level, and the list goes on. And on the advocacy side, we do a lot of work to try to have, in particular, the federal government adopt this more expansive vision for community safety. We also have campaigns on specific issues. So, for example, one that is focused in on youth safety, so very near and dear to my own heart, called the Play Act, which is a chance to really get more investment into youth mentorship, youth violence prevention in communities all across the country. So that's a little bit about me. It's a little bit about the Futures Institute. And just to situate you for our topic here today, what we mean when we talk about community safety is really this broad basket of ways that we can, number one, prevent violence and harm before it happens in the first place through making upstream investments into the things that actually are the root causes of violence. And so that means things like putting up streetlights. It means mental health and substance use addiction treatment. It means making sure that we are investing in housing, in jobs programs, including summer jobs, and all these other sorts of building blocks of safe communities. And then it also means really deeply investing in responses to violence, harm, and crises that prevent these crises, that intervene in these crises, that respond to these crises in ways that really center community. and in ways that, again, are designed to promote rehabilitation and to solve the underlying issues that caused that crisis in the first place. So that means programs of alternative response that are sending social workers to handle particularly crises around mental health and substance use, but also other issues. It means community violence intervention, where violence interrupters will work with people who have oftentimes been victims of gun violence or who are at risk of being so, and the list goes on. So that's what we mean when we talk about community safety, is this broad basket of responses. And so much of what our work is to knit these responses together to create the strongest ecosystems for community safety that our kids and our families really deserve. So all this leads us now back to domestic violence and to thinking about systems we can actually put into place so as to really keep all victims safe. And so to center us for this conversation, I'm going to share a little bit about how we think about these alternative responses to domestic violence in the context of this broader community safety work. Well, today, domestic violence affects over 12 million adults, or an average of 24 people every minute in the United States. According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, those affected include more than 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, and many children and young adults. The harms of DV are also unequal. Transgender and gender non-binary people, people with disabilities, women experiencing homelessness, Black women, and low-income women suffer from violence at disproportionately high rates. Unsurprisingly, then, many survivors fear contacting law enforcement. According to a 2021 survey of survivors of partner abuse, 92% of participants who had not previously called the police were very or somewhat afraid or concerned to call. 39% of participants who previously called reported feeling less safe after doing so. While such fears are certainly not universal, they demonstrate a need for real alternatives, for policy options that prevent, respond to, and support domestic violence survivors without involving the criminal legal system. And thanks to community safety innovations sweeping communities nationwide, such as the responses that I was uplifting a moment ago, we have the ideas, the tools, and the know-how to build this comprehensive, community-centered alternative approach. An alternative approach to domestic violence requires policy responses that support survivors at every step, preventative strategies that prevent such violence before it occurs, alternative response options that offer care rather than criminalization, immediate financial and housing supports to increase survivor autonomy, and repair options that both help survivors heal and engage harm doers to prevent future violence. So the first step to addressing domestic and interpersonal violence involves robust, sustained investments in programs and services that prevent or reduce abuse. Such programs can leverage the insights of evidence-based community violence intervention programs, which target and engage individuals who are at high risk of becoming crime victims or perpetrating them. These may include education programs, such as those that engage men in opposing violence, recognizing that men are significantly more likely to perpetuate every form of interpersonal violence, and offer culturally specific interventions. The New York City-based and Latinx-focused violence intervention program, for example, offers a bilingual youth curriculum helping teens to recognize and reject violent attitudes and beliefs. The second step is having alternatives to law enforcement when abuse has occurred or is occurring, such as civilian models of crisis response, de-escalation trainings for community members, non-police crisis hotlines, and toolkits for individuals who are in crisis. The Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline, managed by the network, offers multilingual safety planning for survivors 24/7. In Baltimore, LifeBridge Health operates 3 hospital-based programs offering survivors free and confidential services, emotional support, and connections to further resources. As these programs accept community referrals, survivors can get help while bypassing police engagement. In New York City, Life Camp operates a mobile trauma unit that provides de-escalation and healing services to residents who are in crisis. And in Rochester, New York, the Office of Crisis Intervention supports trained social workers to address homicides, domestic violence, and mental health crises. Providing these alternative responses to DV further requires jurisdictions to have the right resources available, specifically to help survivors gain financial and housing independence. In Tennessee and Mississippi, the survivor-led Project EAT of the Grad Us Project supports survivors through a 60-day program that provides participants with a cash stipend for completing transitional work experience, then helps them to find a good paying job. In New York City, the Saki for South Asian Women organization offers culturally sensitive and linguistically accessible services for South Asian women survivors, including legal advocacy, translation assistance, and weekly support groups. Programs that help survivors access affordable housing and cash assistance, including one-time payments and state-sponsored aid, can also have a transformative impact. Finally, this holistic approach means offering reparative options to those who want them. These options include trauma-informed care and policies that offer survivors paid leave to find health-related supports. Supporting programming for harm doers is also important because these help to break the cycle of violence. The Men as Peacemakers program, organization in Duluth, Minnesota, for example, hosts the domestic violence restorative circles that involve trained community volunteers and men who have faced legal consequences multiple times for domestic abuse. One 2016 case study found that in 4 years of MAP hosting these circles, only one circle participant reoffended. Meanwhile, the Department of Veterans Affairs runs an assistance program for veterans, their partners, and staff who use or experience intimate partner violence. So how do we move forward? Actualizing this wholesale alternative response to domestic violence will require dedicated and sustained resources, which in turn will require advocacy from on-the-ground practitioners and grassroots leaders who are already driving this work. And the truth is that at this moment now more than ever, this is a time for all of us to be standing up. It's no secret that the challenges facing this community safety work across this country are only growing by the day. There have been reorganizations at the Department of Health and Human Services, which have led to many core programs and offices being reorganized in ways that may make it far more difficult for them to keep funding much of this work. There have also been funding freezes coming out of the Department of Justice that have scaled back funding for tons of restorative justice, violence intervention, and violence prevention programs across this country. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I was on a panel with someone who works in an organization that works with gender-based violence survivors, helps them to access new sources of funding and transitional housing and all sorts of resources that they need. And she has just lost her funding due to these cuts. So all to say, the headwinds right now are real, but also is the opportunity for us to lean in and make sure that the support for community safety only continues to grow on the ground. And so that means first, making sure that we are doing our part to have folks who are in DC know the value of these sorts of programs on the ground. It means also making sure that folks at the local level and the state level in those policymaking circles can step up and make sure that the lights stay on for these programs that are doing critical work. But with that being said, I hope that some of this has landed for you. If you have any questions on any of the community safety issues that I spoke about here today, please do not hesitate to reach out. And with that being said, I hope that you enjoyed the rest of the conference.